Welcome to Property Pillars. This is a show where we talk to property professionals about buy-to-let investments, mortgages, land developments and other topics. Whether you're a first-time buyer or a seasoned investor, this is a show for you. How do we protect our property assets during our lives and upon death? It's a very important topic. So on today's show, we have with us a wills and estate planning specialist, Mr. Collins Missouri of While We Can. He's going to be talking to us about the importance of protecting our property assets during our lifetimes and upon our death. So, without further ado, I'd love to welcome to Property Pillars today, Mr. Collins Missouri. So, tell me, how do I protect my property assets during my life and upon death?
It's a broad question, Toyin. It all depends on the nature and extent of your estate. What sort of assets have you got? It also depends on the type of marriage you've contracted. And it also depends on your family dynamics, your relations.
If I was to give you this situation as an example, if I was a married woman, I owned the property and the mortgage with my husband as in joint names, and we had one child together. And I had a buy-to-let property as well. So how would I protect my share using a will?
If you own an asset jointly with somebody and execute a will and write a will, upon death your will has no effect because your share of the jointly owned asset will simply pass on to the surviving joint tenant. Now, to answer your question, how do you protect your shares in that house using a will? The answer is you need to sever the tenancy first. Sever the joint tenancy. By severing, you are actually converting it into a tenancy in common. Now, once it is a tenancy in common, you now have your distinct shares. Your spouse has his distinct shares. Now, you can then set up, or in your will, you set a trust in your will. That is called a testamentary trust, if you want, in which you are giving your spouse a life interest to enjoy your shares.
So, a joint tenant situation would be where the properties are held in joint names, but they're like Siamese twins in the sense that in the event of one person's passing, his share is passed on to the living spouse. Yes? That's what a joint tenancy is. Whereas a tenancy in common, which are not Siamese twins situations, when one party dies, his share, the deceased, can pass to his beneficiary.
Yes.
So what we're saying here is that in order to distinguish between the two, we've got to make sure that we sever the joint tenancy situation so that your share can be transferred across to the beneficiaries. Is that right?
First action, yes.
So that's the first action you need to take.
Absolutely right.
Okay.
What type of marriage have you contracted? Are you cohabiting or you are in a civil marriage? If you're in a civil marriage, it's all the same. You may have applied to sever the tenants. It's now a tenant in common. But upon death, your husband has a claim on your estate. He is the first beneficiary, which means it will still go to him. But what you need to do then is to plan. You and your husband come up with mirror wills with testamentary trust in them that is giving either of you a life interest to enjoy each other's shares up until one gets remarries or dies. Wow. Once she passes on, your share then comes back to your beneficiaries, equally the same with his.
Collins, my next question is, other than going through all of that, can I not just transfer my share of my asset to my child whilst I'm alive?
Now,
yes.
You can give your assets to anybody you want. You may still be a minor, maybe underage, say below the age of 18 if you want, right? That may not happen. If he is above 18, you can give your assets to anybody you want. But you need to consider the consequences of that. There are numerous examples of people who gave away assets prematurely. For instance, Whitney Houston.
Whitney Houston?
Yes. Mm-hmm. All her assets went to her child. She was the main beneficiary in her estate. And who knows what may possibly have triggered her drug use, excessive drug use and things like that. She may have got far too much at a very young age, which is not advisable. Apart from that, you must survive another 7 years. You are aware of that.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
You must survive for the next 7 years for that to avoid,
tax
forming part of your estate.
Yeah. So that's what they call the lifetime chargeable transfer. Yes. It's a gift.
So
now,
yeah, I mean it's not really advisable to. It's a very bad way of estate planning.
That's interesting. Now, people talk about trusts a lot, and I've heard about trusts in different contexts. Yes. So can you explain to me, in your simple way, how does a trust work?
You are setting a legal entity to hold your assets. So in other words, you are the donor yourself of the trust. You then now need to fund it. By funding the trust, you need to transfer all your assets into the name of that trust you've created. As you do that, Toyin, you will remain with all the powers that we have over your assets today. You can still buy, you can still sell, you can still do what you want with your property. Now, you then need to appoint successor trustees. Those who will, step into your shoes in the event that either you fail to make decisions on your own or you die. Who are these? These may be your friends. You need somebody possibly with a bit of, legal background, somebody maybe with financial background, and your relative. So you've got somebody to look into the legal affairs of your estate. You've got somebody to look into the financial and tax matters of your estate. And you have got somebody on the board of trustees who is protecting your beneficiaries' interest.
Wow.
Now, once you then die, they take over the management of your assets on behalf of your beneficiaries. In your trust, you need to appoint your beneficiaries, as it's obvious, isn't it? And you may also need to consider then giving your trustees a roadmap. How do you want your assets to be managed? Maybe you want them to pay some money to your child when she attains a given age. Maybe when she marries, you want them to help you with, deposit for a mortgage. As life transits.
Okay. It seems that there's a lot to estate planning, will writing, and trusts. And a lot of people are going to watch this and I'm thinking, oh, this is a lot. And most people who don't take action, just because there is a lot to consider. But I want you to tell us, what are the dangers of doing nothing?
Having a plan of doing nothing, you are giving the government in this country the opportunity then to decide as to who are going to be your beneficiaries, and this is under the rules of intestacy. All people who die without plans, the government has got, a plan in place that is rigid. And the people who may end up benefiting from your estate may not be the ones who you want to benefit.
People have talked about properties, estate planning, and we've heard of celebrities who have done things well and some haven't done things so well. Look at celebrities. Can you give me one or two examples of a celebrity who passed on, who did a good job of estate planning, And one example of a celebrity who passed on, he did a bad job of estate planning.
That's a very good question. History is littered with a number of celebrities who really failed to make good decisions in terms of their estate plans. Whitney Houston is the one we've talked about, apparently. Even if she had a will, but the manner in which it was drafted, a will is just as good as the one who is drafting it, if you want. You have Mr. Mandela, for instance.
Nelson Mandela.
Nelson Mandela.
Yes.
The late Mandela had a will in which he created a trust, which we called a testamentary trust. And as that was done, that included the village where he was buried. But this village, when Mr. Mandela divorced, was not actually dealt with
as part of the divorce.
As part of the divorce settlement.
Mm-hmm.
And it was left for, further discussions or further deliberations, if you want. And eventually he passed without anything having been done. And today, when he's claiming she owns part of it.
So his ex-wife, Winnie Mandela, now claims that she.
Yeah, they have been to court, but the initial decision, she has not been successful. But I think her lawyers said they were going to be appealing.
But what you're saying is, had Mr. Mandela during his lifetime dealt with that appropriately, that would never have been a problem later.
Not at all. If this was put to the, legal consultant who drafted his will, if he had known that it was a matter that was not resolved on divorce, I think he would have put some clause to deal with that, yes.
Can you think of an example of a good celebrity that structured himself very well before he passed on?
Steve Jobs.
Steve Jobs.
Perfect.
Tell us what happened there.
He was a genius. Steve Jobs was a genius because when he went for a liver transplant, he came back and created a trust into which he transferred all his assets. When he sadly passed away, Steve Jobs saved his estate, a whopping $830 million.
So when he passed on, he saved his estate how much?
$830 million.
$830 million.
Yes.
Because he had...
Yeah, because he had
planned well.
Right. He had planned well.
I have to say thank you, Mr. Musero, because we can talk about this all day.
It's a broad topic.
It's such a broad topic. And it's so important for us to capture the importance of estate planning, because we're looking at situations, if you don't do it, it has diverse consequences. So I want to say thank you, Collins Musero, for While We Can, estate planning specialist here in the UK. So if you'd like more information about estate planning whilst you're alive and upon your death, Collins is available for coaching, mentoring, teaching and consultancy, and he'll also be available for workshops. His details will be on our website. We'll link his details on the website so you can get in touch with him via www.propertypillars.co.uk. But I want to close by saying thank you so much for coming on the show. We can have another discussion about this another day, but I really appreciate you being here. I've enjoyed everything. I've learned so much as well. So once again, Property Pillars, I thank you, Collins Musero, for coming onto the show. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Toyin.
All right.
It has been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.